What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my Week 14 tight end start sits, talking about every single fantasy relevant tight end, every single matchup, listing all of them as either a start, fringe option, or sit. The starts are going to be like your mid to high end tight end ones. The tight ends you have a lot of confidence firing up into your lineup. The fringe options, more of your back end tight end ones to your high end tight end twos. They're fine, they're playable, but you probably don't feel overly ecstatic about throwing them into your lineup. This is going to be my last start sit video of the week, so if you haven't seen the quarterbacks, running backs, or wide receivers, those are all up on my channel. Let's start off with the Thursday night matchup here with the Patriots taking on the Steelers. Not a super pretty matchup here for the Patriots. I mean, really the only weapons you want is either going to be like the starting running back, which we'd assume would be Zeke, and then potentially Demario Douglas if he's able to give it a go. Definitely have no interest in playing Hunter Henry in this one. And then looking at Pat Freiermuth here with the Steelers, I have him as a sit. It definitely seems like he came back down to earth in week 13. And looking at his 7-game sample size this season, the huge breakout game he had in week 12 just looks like an extreme outlier. He has had 3 or fewer receptions in 6 of those 7 games this season. The Steelers offense is not good. I don't really think the switch from Pickett to Trubisky is really going to do anything all that crazy here for Pat Freiermuth. And he's facing off against a Patriots defense that has been really tough over the past few weeks. So I really don't have a ton of interest in firing up Pat Freiermuth. This has been a disappointing season overall, and I don't necessarily expect a huge turnaround here rest of season, so he will be a sit for me. Then looking at the Buccaneers taking on the Falcons, going to be another matchup here with both sits. Cade Otton, he's had some fine games here or there. There's really just not enough of a ceiling and not a high enough floor for me to actually trust him in my lineup week to week, especially here in week 14 where we only have 2 teams on bye. The tight end position isn't terrible. I would prefer to be sitting Cade Otton. And then similar thing here with Kyle Pitts. The production just hasn't been there. We know he's a super talented young player. It just has not come through yet, and I don't know if it's going to happen this season. So Kyle Pitts also going to be a sit. Then looking at the Rams taking on the Ravens. For the Rams here, going to have Tyler Higbee as a sit. He had a big week 12 also with 2 touchdowns. Was not able to come close to replicating that here in week 13. Hasn't been a great season overall. When you have Kupp and Puka healthy, there's just not going to be a ton of opportunities to go around. Plus, he draws a really tough matchup here against this Ravens defense. So Higbee's a sit. I think Isaiah Likely is a nice back-end tight end 1 play, so I have him as a fringe option. He slides into really solid usage without Mark Andrews. Obviously, he's not the same type of player as Mark Andrews, so he's not just going to come in and replicate his production. But I think he's a nice tight end 1, a nice option if Mark Andrews did go down or whatever you're struggling at the tight end position. I think he's a fine play this week here as a solid top 12 guy. Then looking at a divisional matchup between the Lions and the Bears, Sam Laporta just continues to kill it, coming off another massive game. I think the Lions are going to put up points on this Bears defense. You fire up Sam Laporta as a high-end tight end 1 with a lot of confidence. Then looking at the Bears here, I have Cole Kmet as a fringe option. Some people may think he should be more locked in as a start. In my opinion, I think this is a fair spot. He's averaging back-end tight end 1 production when Justin Fields is his quarterback. He had a couple boom games with Tyler Bagent, which has kind of upped his points per game a little bit. But with Fields, he's at 10.4 PPR points per game. It's fine at the tight end position. It's playable, but I don't think you're overly excited to throw Cole Kmet in your lineup. So more of a back-end tight end 1 play, and that's why I have him as a fringe option. Then looking at the Colts Bengals matchup, really not much here at the tight end position. Going to be sitting Kylen Granson and Tanner Hudson. Both these offenses go out there and use tight end by committees, so don't want to be relying on either of those guys or those offenses with the tight end position. Next is going to be the Jaguars taking on the Browns, and for the Jaguars here, I'd assume they're going to be without Trevor Lawrence. I don't believe he's officially been ruled out, but high ankle sprain seems very, very unlikely he plays. Even if it's not Trevor Lawrence, I still think Evan Ingram's a nice play. His production all season long had been really impressive. He really was just missing out on getting into the end zone. We finally saw that. I'm not sure how much touchdown upside he's going to have in this game, just with a likely backup quarterback and going up against this Browns defense, but he's going to be a focal point in this offense. Christian Kirk out. He's going to be one of their top 2 targets, so I do like him here as a mid-tier tight end 1 play. And then for the Browns with David Njoku, I have him as a fringe option. I think he's a back-end tight end 1. He was on a really nice stretch, and it was kind of surprising because he was overcoming some not-so-great quarterback play, kind of broke that streak in week 13. I still think he's a fine option. He's just not in a great offensive situation here with the Browns' current QB spot. So back in tight end 1, I think is a fair spot. Then looking at a divisional matchup between the Panthers and the Saints. For the Panthers here, just no interest in their tight end position. Going to be sitting Ian Thomas. Then looking at the Saints, Taysom Hill just continues to rack up these really well-rounded games in terms of his usage. He's a locked-in start for me. In Week 13, he had 13 carries, 2 targets, and 2 pass attempts. He's getting work on the goal line. He got into the end zone. That type of usage definitely has to have him be considered as a very solid weekly starter at the tight end position. Juwan Johnson was someone who I thought could give you some production with the wide receiver injuries. He really did not come through last week, so definitely not going to be considering him playing him this week. So he is going to be a sit. Looking at the Texans taking on the Jets. For the Texans, we kind of have some, injury stuff that leaves this tight end room up in the air. We had Dalton Schultz, who had kind of weird usage in Week 12. His snaps were low. His route participation was low. I don't think he played later on in the fourth quarter. We didn't really know what that was. It seems clear now that that was due to an injury because he missed the Week 13 game. But with Dalton Schultz out, Brevin Jordan stepped in, logged a 77% route participation. He's also second on their team in terms of targets and receiving yards. They obviously have a hole in terms of their weapons now with Tank Dell out for the season. So I think if Dalton Schultz is not able to give it a go, I think Brevin Jordan is a nice fringe play. If Dalton Schultz is back, if he was fully healthy, I would trust him as a start in my lineup, especially considering the Tank Dell injury. But I'm a little bit worried that if Dalton Schultz does play, he might be somewhat limited, and him and Brevin Jordan would be splitting snaps. So if Schultz is back, I'd consider him more of a fringe option, and then Brevin Jordan would be a sit, because I'd obviously be assuming that Dalton Schultz would be the clear starter there. So that's kind of how I'm viewing that Texans tight end room. And then for the Jets, going to be sitting Tyler Conklin. This offense just continues to look miserable. I think their implied points this week is like 13. It's just really not pretty there for that Jets offense. Moving over to the Vikings Raiders matchup. For the Vikings, TJ Hockenson has been a really nice option all season long. You continue to fire him up as a high-end tight end 1, even if we don't necessarily know where they're going at the quarterback position. I think he's a nice play regardless. Looking at the Raiders here, I think Michael Mayer is interesting as a guy heading into next season, but this year, just with the current offensive state of the Raiders, I struggle to actually have any trust with him in my fantasy lineup. Then looking at the Seahawks 49ers divisional matchup. For the Seahawks, we saw Noah Fant take, a larger percent of the routes run compared to what we've seen in previous weeks, which is somewhat interesting. Not enough to the point where I want to consider playing him, especially in a bad matchup here against the 49ers, but something to maybe look out for here over the last few weeks of the season. And then for the 49ers here, definitely going to be starting George Kittle as a locked-in, strong weekly tight end 1 play. We're going to have the Bills taking on the Chiefs, and for the Bills here, Dalton Kincaid coming off the bye week, but prior to the bye had been very impressive. It's possible we get Dawson Knox back this week. I really don't think it's going to impact Dalton Kincaid too much. The Bills need weapons. He's proven he's legit. I think his role is solidified within this offense. I think really the Dawson Knox return would just impact the wide receivers because they would likely go to more 2 wide receiver sets, which would either bump out Khalil Shakir or Gabe Davis, most likely Khalil Shakir, but even if they want to play Dawson Knox, I think both those guys are going to be on the field together. So Kincaid's a start. Knox would be a sit if he's playing. For the Chiefs, Kelsey hasn't had great production as of late, but is certainly still very startable at the tight end position, so lock him into your lineup. Looking at the Broncos Chargers here, don't really love what we have here at the tight end position. For the Broncos, going to be sitting Adam Troutman, just pretty much no production this season. Then for the Chargers, Gerald Everett actually hasn't been terrible on the season, but the weekly floor is just so low. He's gotten into the end zone a few times, which has kind of helped his point per game number. Both these guys honestly have been able to get into the end zone, but there's just no weekly floor. I don't think the ceiling is super high because even if they score a touchdown, there's not a ton of volume or receiving yardage to go along with it. So both those guys are going to be sits for me. Looking at the Eagles-Cowboys matchup, I like both of these tight ends as like mid-tier tight end 1 plays. No guarantee Dallas Goedert plays this week, but if he does, it's kind of just where he's going to slot in. And then for the Cowboys here, Jake Ferguson coming off of a huge game. Dak continues to ball out. This could honestly be an ugly game for this Eagles secondary. The Cowboys have been firing on all cylinders. Eagles secondary has definitely been suspect. I could see big games out of CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and potentially Jake Ferguson this week. And then we're going to have the Titans taking on the Dolphins. Definitely a step down in terms of the tight end position. Going to be sitting Chigo Okonkwo. just not enough of a ceiling to make up for also not having a super high weekly floor. He's a sit. Dolphins, Durham Smythe runs a decent number of routes, but just no involvement there with those Dolphins tight ends. And then the final game of the week, Packers Giants. For the Packers here, their starting tight end, whether it's been Luke Musgrave or Tucker Kraft, has had solid usage in terms of the route participation, but in terms of actually turning that into fantasy production, it just hasn't happened. So going to continue to sit their tight end one, which this week will be Tucker Kraft. And then for the Giants, it does not look like Darren Waller will be able to make his return this week, so probably still rolling with Daniel Bellinger, and he will definitely be a sit in my fantasy lineups, really not even rosterable. So that's going to wrap it up for all the Week 14 tight end matchups. Hopefully you're solid this week at the position. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. Check out the other start sit videos. Thank you as always for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.